Hello, today I have 3 awesome histogram tips to help you improve your photography. Let's go. So I've put together these 3 histogram tips to help you improve your exposure whilst out in the field, and also an editing tip to help you improve your editing skills too. So the histogram is a graph showing the blacks and whites in an image. The blacks are displayed on the left hand side and the whites are displayed on the right hand side. Everything else falls in the middle depending on its luminosity. So how can this help us get the correct exposure? Let's take a look at these 3 examples. So the first histogram is an overexposed image. Here we can see all of the pixels bunched to the right. This means we've lost detail in our highlights or whites. The second histogram is an underexposed image. Here we can see all of the pixels bunched over to the left hand side, so we can see we've lost details in the blacks. So here we can see a more balanced histogram with no loss of detail at all. We haven't bunched any of the pixels against either end of the graph, meaning we haven't lost any details at all within this scene. So the first tip is to get the histogram on your LCD screen. Most cameras will have this if you dig around in the menu settings, and use this to gain the correct exposure. Now you will need to use manual settings, or if you're in aperture priority you can use the exposure compensation dial to adjust your histogram to get the correct exposure. Now I know this is a very basic step, but it really leads on to step number 2, which is something that is vital for gaining the perfect exposure. So this is when things get a little bit tricky. Now when you're viewing your LCD screen, your camera will be displaying a JPEG profile. Now this is going to be different to a RAW file. Now I definitely recommend shooting in RAW, but you will need to make sure that you choose maybe a standard profile to look at your images on the LCD, because this will affect your histogram. So if you choose vivid, for example, there's a lot more contrast in these JPEG profiles, and what you'll find is your histogram will be completely different to your raw file histogram. So when you're viewing the scene, you might look like you're overexposing, but when you go back to the computer, you might find that your histogram is nicely balanced. So it can really play a massive part in getting the correct exposure. So we're going to head back to the computer now and take a quick look at 3 examples, and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So if you're new to the channel and you're into your photography and fancy seeing more content from me, please consider subscribing to the channel and hit the bell notification button to be notified next time I make an upload. That being said, let's take a look at these histograms in Lightroom. So here we are in Adobe Lightroom. Now I took 3 different photographs of the back end of my studio, just loads of junk in the background, and I've lit up the scene to slightly overexpose it. Now these 3 images are all the raw images that I took. Now as you can see here, we have the settings for each individual shot that I took. Now I changed the JPEG profile for these 3 images, so we can see the histogram changing in each individual image too. So now let's take a closer look at these images to see the difference side by side. So here we can see the back of our LCD screen, and we can see our histogram here. You can see here that we've shot it in Velvia, which is similar to landscape or vivid, maybe on the Canon or Nikon cameras. But what we can see here is we are massively overexposed on this shot. You can see the histograms all bunched up to the right hand side. But when we look at our histogram on the raw file in Lightroom, we can see a big difference. We've only just got a little bit of clip in here. Now I've purposely overexposed this image just so we can see how much the difference is between the 2 histogram graphs. Now obviously we're not looking at the colors here, we're just looking at the grayscale graph. So the top of it is very similar to the top here and here, but obviously we can see this bunched up amount of pixels on the right hand side is completely different. We've got a lot more highlights clipping in the Velvia film simulation than we do have on the raw file. So you can see how different this is. Now let me quickly bring up the black and white profile, and we can see that this is a lot closer to our histogram on the raw file. Such a massive difference. Now this can really make a big difference when we're out in the field shooting. So if I was to expose for the Velvia simulation, what I might have done is pushed my histogram further to the left, and maybe I'd have underexposed the image and lost some details in the shadows. So you can see how this can really affect your image and give you a false reading. So I definitely recommend choosing a flat profile like this is the standard profile for Fuji. I think Nikon and Canon have very similar flat profiles, maybe neutral or standard, I believe they're called. It's well worth looking into that. And if you can, maybe drop down your highlights and your shadows. Now, this is giving me a very similar looking histogram to that of the raw file. So this is what I usually shoot in, standard, and dropping these two down a little bit. And it's giving me a very, very similar histogram. So I know that when I'm shooting, my histogram is giving me a pretty close reading to what I'm actually going to get when I open the raw file in Lightroom. So this can really, really make a massive difference to how you are exposing your images when you're out in the field. So tip number 3 is an editing based tip and how we can manipulate the histogram to help us improve the exposure or the overall look of an image. Now, as you can see here, I've chosen a very, very flat looking image. Actually, this was shot a couple of weeks ago on a collaboration I did with Henry Turner. So if you haven't checked that video out, guys, it's well worth a look. I'll leave the link for you up in the top there and down below. Now, this image was taken on a very, very dull and misty day, but it's quite atmospheric and I actually quite like it. But as you can see, there's a lot of mid-tone greys in this shot, and it's made up mainly of mid-tone greys. So we can see the histogram starts here and finishes here, well short of the whites and the blacks. Now, my tip number 3 is to help you manipulate the histogram and gain a much better overall balanced exposure. So what you can do, you can actually drag your histogram around to improve the overall look and exposure of your image. So as you can see, it's not reaching the blacks and it's not reaching the whites on the right hand side. So if we come up into the black area of the image, we can drag the histogram over until we feel it's reaching the black area, and we can also drag this area over until we feel it's reaching the white area. Now we can also drag different areas of the histogram around as well to give us different looks and appearances. We'll add like contrast into your image, brighten your image up, add like more black into the image. You can do lots of things just by dragging the histogram around. And what this is doing is moving these sliders here. It's doing that automatically for you. And it actually can give you quite a good amount of control over the image. Now, as you can see, this image now has a lot more vibrancy to it, has a lot more punch to it. It's a lot more contrast to it. If I hit backslash on the keyboard, you'll see the before and now the after. It's made a huge difference to the way the image looks. It's a pretty cool feature. I definitely recommend playing around with the histogram, sliding it around, see what you can actually achieve with just using the histogram. So guys, I hope you got something from the video today. These are 3 cool little tips you can use to improve your photography with the histogram. So if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing, hit the thumbs up if you liked it, and also hit that notification bell button because we're doing weekly uploads this year. So I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into 2019, up into the Lake District in a couple of weeks' time for my first trip up there. So I can't wait to get up there. Hopefully we're going to get some snow on the fells, which would be awesome. So see you soon, guys.